All right, everybody, welcome back to part 2 of our little series on using the XA cameras. So for this particular video, we are going to go over how to do some basic shooting setups. So my subject here, Mr. Leland Palmer, is in the forefront of our frame. And a couple of things about positioning talent. If you are using a background, a solid background, you want to have some separation between the subject and the background. So I'm only using a 2-light system, with one being right here on the left, and then with one being over here on the right. And you'll notice that if I have Mr. Palmer scooted up against the background, there is a horrible shadow that is coming in from this light on the left. I can actually turn that off to show that difference. So in order to avoid that shadow, I need to have the subject move forward. So in this case, I'll walk Mr. Palmer forward, and you'll notice that that shadow is still present a little bit off to this side over here, but it is greatly diminished. So this gives a more professional look. Next up would be other tips that you could give to talent. Ensure that they are looking at you during an interview, because in the end it needs to be an organic conversation. And in order to make it look like they are looking at the camera, as Mr. Palmer is, you want to be around the side of the camera, so that they are making eye contact with you in that direction. If you are further away from the camera, your subject will turn to look at you, and, well, they won't fall over, but it will make for an awkward-looking shot. You notice a lot of local news uses this, and that's not exactly the look that we are going for or that we want for commercial-type production. So let me go ahead and have Mr. Palmer look back towards the camera. And there we are. So we'll go over in another video how to wire up a mic onto talent for audio purposes, but we'll forego that for this particular video. So the next thing that we need to talk about is setting up our focus, our white balance, and a few different types of things related to that. So I'm going to ask Mr. Palmer to exit the premises. Now we just have our white background. But what appears to be a brighter white to me doesn't appear to be, it appears to be a little bit red on camera. And I feel that Canon cameras kind of introduce a lot of red into their particular their shooting. Sony cameras tend to be a little more on the bluer side. But in order to fix that, we're going to go over how to set your white balance on your camera to where it is actually the correct color of white. So in order to do that, you'll need to go to the, just one second as I turn my air conditioner off. You will need to go to Function. And then white balance right here on the left hand side is automatically set to auto white balance. We want to change that, so we're going to click that button, and you'll notice that there are several different options here. So the sun stands for outdoors, the house stands for shade, the cloud stands for cloudy, obviously. The bar light stands for LED light, I believe. The H LED light is lights with more of a halogen type bulb in them. The single low-hanging light bulb is for indoor, and then K is if you want to specify what temperature in Kelvin you're shooting at. So incandescent bulbs inside tend to run around 3200 Kelvin. And right now the camera is set up for 5500 Kelvin, which is daylight. So I can manually dial that in if I want to, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to think about what temperature in Kelvin is the light that I'm receiving right now. Plus these are These are newer LED lights that I'm using with this set, if you'll call it that, on my desktop. So I want to go ahead and preset something. So down here in the bottom left, you have 1 and 2. So you can either have a preset 1 or a preset 2. So I'm going to go ahead and go to preset 1. And you'll notice that it says set the white balance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in on the white paper so that it fills up everything inside of that. And I'm going to click the set white balance button. And you'll notice that that number changes a little bit until it arrives at, it thinks it is 5100 Kelvin. Let's go ahead and click that one more time to verify. And yes, it appears to be 5100 Kelvin. So if I zoom out, you'll notice that the white is a lot whiter than before. It tended to be a little bit hotter before, or blue, depending on what your nomenclature for that would be. But now it is set to 5100 Kelvin. So I'll go ahead and introduce Mr. Palmer back into our setup. And yes, his skin tone is much better reflected now. So I'll adjust him a little bit to where he's looking at the screen, or looking at the camera. All right, let's see. Next up would be manual focus. So I'll go ahead and exit out of that. I'll go to function. And there is, oh, I skipped it up. So right below white balance is the AF/MF button. So if you wanted to set it to manual focus, what that would do is enable you to use the ring on the camera to set the focal point. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to manual focus and then click OK. So now if I zoom in and if I touch the ring, let's see. Let me zoom in on Mr. Palmer just as I would do in the TV studio and I adjust the focus. Let's see. Yeah. So right there it's going to lock my focus into place. When I think, yeah, there's some good texture in his suit. You can actually see some of the dust from my office desk also. So it's insane how far the digital zoom will go in. But that is locked in for focus. And now if we zoom out, you'll notice that Mr. Palmer appears to be in full focus. So that is how you set the manual focus on a camera. So once it is set, you will utilize the ring to do fine adjustments. And as I had it before, the ring is up near the front of the camera on the body. And you can actually see the focus rolling into, it looks like it is most in focus about 0.8, let's go with 0.8 feet away. And it's kind of difficult to see that, but that is about how far away the camera is from Mr. Palmer in this case. So that would be how you would set the manual focus on the camera. Next up will be natural sound. So as part of your B-roll assignment in video 1, if you are collecting natural sound for your video, you will do that by the easiest way to do that is to go to the bar, the handle on top of the camera and switch the handle to off. That button is in the middle, and it'll automatically be taking in natural sound as of that point. A couple of other explanations on stuff that you might see on here. You will see that there's a little face over here that's mainly aligns with face detection. You could turn that on or off if you like. I prefer to have it off. And let's see. No, I don't think it matters that it's on per se. But I would like to, currently I have dynamic image stabilization on, and that basically means that if Mr. Palmer moves around, it attempts to stabilize the image. But since I have it on a tripod, there's really not a need for that. So I could turn that off if I wanted to, and you'll notice that it pops out a little bit because it uses a dynamic warp stabilizer to ensure that the image that's in the center of the frame is always in focus. But as I said, for my usage, I don't really need that on, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And let's see if there's anything else I can walk you through on these displays. So currently it is set to record program is set to P for program. I could, if I wanted to get deep into the woods and shoot this in a truly manual fashion, I could shoot in TV, which is shutter priority. And I could change the shutter priority. I don't necessarily want to do that for the purposes of this. I would think that probably a more helpful thing would be, well, before I get to that, if you are planning on using sort of a slow-mo effect on your footage, it's always good to make sure that the shutter speed that you have is exactly twice of what the frame rate is. So if you're shooting in 30 frames per second, you want to have your shutter around 60 or at 60. If you're shooting slow-mo at, let's say, 120 frames, then that'd be a good case to have your shutter speed at 1/240 or 1/250. But something you might want to play around with is Aperture Priority mode. So what Aperture Priority mode does, and appears I have a fly in here. What Aperture Priority mode does is allow you to manually adjust the aperture of the camera. So right now it is at, the aperture that is chosen is 4.4. So if I wanted to increase that, you'll notice that it brightens this up a little bit, but it also introduces some shutter roll because I'm at a more open aperture. So let's go ahead and roll it back to 4.4 so that shutter is not present. Probably in your photography classes, you'll get more into the shutter triangle, or I'm sorry, the exposure triangle, and learn how to balance those things like shutter, aperture, and ISO. But for the purposes of this, we won't really be going into that. If you do want to shoot an aperture priority, it's much more recommended that you utilize one of the cameras with a removable lens, such as the Canon C100 or one of the, well, we don't have any mirrorless cameras for checkout at the moment, but a mirrorless DSLR. So, I don't really want to dive too much into manual exposure. Yeah, I'm not happy with that, so I'll just leave it in programmed. And the other option is scene. So if I'm doing a portrait, as you can see, it widens the aperture a little bit to give a more depth of field. So you'll notice that there is a blurrier background here behind Mr. Palmer, but in exchange for that, some shutter roll is introduced. If I wanted to do it in sports mode, it introduces even more shutter roll to that, and that's good for capturing fast-moving objects, such as my hand. And then there is nighttime, a snow setting, a beach setting, a sun setting. I believe that is a campfire setting or a candle setting. Spotlight and fireworks if you choose to capture that. So there are many different settings in here, but for our purposes, we'll just leave it on the programmed auto exposure. Other things of note on this screen are in the top, very top right, you have access to how much time is left on your battery. In the case of this particular battery, there are 201 minutes, which is roughly 3 hours and 21 minutes. But the card will give out long before the battery does. So there's only 2 hours and 1 minute of recording time available on the camera. And then right below that number for memory card A is my current frame rate, as well as the megabits per second and the recording format, which is what you should be in most cases at. So 2997, 17 megabits per second shooting an MP4. And our deep dive video that I just did recently kind of goes into how that is done. So I think that is really all I wanted to cover for this particular video as far as setting up for the shot. My next video will go over shot types as well as camera movement and more stuff related to the B-roll assignment for Video Production 1. So thank you so much for joining me.